welcome to Let's Talk Native on the Saturday, June 22nd. While this program may not provide a path to spiritual enlightenment, we do encourage and sometimes start conversations. We don't do prayers and we don't do buffalo speeches. We take on the tough issues. We look at history, oppression, survival. We talk about culture, the arts, politics, identity, and we may step on a few toes along the way. But our real goal here is to bring people together by breaking down what separates us. We'll take on the false narratives and provide critical thinking to all that is heaped upon us. And we do it all right here from the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation. So let's talk Native. Before I do that, let me remind people that this show is not only broadcasting on our website, which is letstalknative.com, but we also Facebook live stream it. So if you can catch the Facebook live stream on various group pages, on the Let's Talk Native group page, and on several other group pages that we share the show to. We take the audio and we put it up on SoundCloud, which puts it out as a podcast that you can find on all your favorite podcast platforms. We take the video and we put it up on our YouTube channel, which is Let's Talk Native TV. You can find videos of this show, my show in New York, and some of the short form videos that we do on various topics. So I encourage you to not only check out our website, but subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. I am the host of Let's Talk Native, and I am assisted in studio by Jake Proud, who's managing our video and our sound. Lots of conversation this week about reparations. It's not about us, but there is a conversation about reparations. And in fact, I had investigative journalists from New York reach out to me and wondered if I would like to weigh in on the reparations conversation, because clearly it is difficult to talk about reparations for slavery if we're not going to talk about genocide, and realizing that we are two distinct peoples, oftentimes affected by the same issue: doctrine of discovery, racism, and of course a variety of other things. But there are still two different issues there. My first thought on reparations, and I've got to do what everybody else does. I got to point out what is the most common comment that is offered up by white people, especially as it relates to this conversation. And it always goes something like this: that happened in the past. There are no people today that are victims of slavery or beneficiaries of slavery. That's what the argument is about, doing anything to right a historical wrong. And I got to be careful. I don't mean that it's only a historical wrong, and I'll get into that in a moment. But it's almost absurd to hear people say that, again, it's something in the past, so everybody just needs to get over it. And this is where I got to bring up the historical issue. There is nobody today that is not impacted by what took place at the beginning, at the foundation of the United States. Slavery, genocide that took place. You either benefited from it, or you continue to be victimized by the very act of slavery, by the very act of the blatant racism that went into both slavery and genocide. So for anybody to say that that it's all those people who benefited from slavery are long gone, no, there are still people today that benefit from white privilege, and that white privilege was enshrined for over 100 years. Well, for just under 100 years for the United States, but for hundreds of years prior to that, coming from Columbus to the colonial period. But 100 years of the United States was completely invested in human chattel, and of course the theft of lands, the murdering of Native people who occupied those lands, the rape, the slaughter, the genocide, the stealing of children, all of that stuff. So I can't talk about the reparations issue as it relates to us only if I don't at least address the issue as it relates to what Black people experience today because of what their ancestors experienced. Now, one of the things I got to be clear though, only 400,000, and I want to say, I say only because it's got to be, it's relative, right? Only 400,000 people were treated, were kidnapped from Africa, dragged in slave ships, and began what would ultimately be an entire industry of breeding black people in captivity for slavery. But only 400,000 were brought from Africa to at least to North America. I mean, many more were brought to South America and the Caribbean and other places. Now, and I'm not saying this to be dismissive. What I'm saying is that when you can think about the actual firsthand victims of being your freedom taken away and put into slavery, it's a smaller number than the number of Native people who were killed. And so I'm only trying to put it in that perspective. The number of Native people, there are some estimates that there were as many as 100 million Native people living in the Western Hemisphere. And how many were in the northern North America versus South America. Yeah. But most real honest archaeologists and anthropologists would suggest that there were at least 40 million Native people living in North America when white people came here. That number would be reduced to a couple of 100,000. I mean, almost completely wipe out the entire population of Native people. That's how very few Native people survived the genocide. And of course, our population has come back some. So, and again, it's not to minimize the impact of slavery, because let's face it, you had millions of black people who would actually be born into slavery. I mean, even Thomas Jefferson, who treated one of his slaves as a sex slave, had children with a slave, and his children were still slaves. They were the house Negroes, but they were still slaves nonetheless. I mean, the absurdity of it is incredible. So, I'm understanding that the wealth of the current wealth of the United States is still in large part affected by the fact that they stole land and they stole the lives of ultimately what would be millions of people in terms of slavery. They would wipe out millions of lives in terms of Native people to build the wealth of the United States. In 1860, if you were to measure what were the largest assets of industry in the United States, it was slaves. It was free labor. I mean, it wasn't machinery. It wasn't even buildings. It wasn't. They didn't even consider the land the most valuable. But from an industrial asset, human beings, slaves were the number one asset. I mean, that's incredible to wrap your head around. And so that's what America's wealth gets built. And you know what? It isn't just America's wealth. America's politics was built on that. The fact that you still have, one of the pillars of the Republican Party is blatant racism is not an accident. It didn't happen by accident. That's a result of slavery. The president of the United States was murdered for freeing the slaves for all intents and purposes, although he was a Republican, and the Republicans and Democrats would kind of swap on where they stand on things like, racism, KKK, white supremacy, all that stuff. But make no mistake, white supremacy crossed all party lines. I mean, it didn't matter. I mean, white supremacy was something that both the Democrats, Republicans, whatever parties existed in the beginning of the United States, right up through. And it still exists today. Look, if you listen to Joe Biden, who is running for the presidency as the Democrat, as the alternative to Trump. If you listen to some of, I should have had Jake pull the audio up on this thing. There's a speech that he gave when he was supporting the crime bill, where he flat out said, I don't care why they commit crimes. I don't care about their circumstances. I care that my wife might be raped. My child might be killed. And he's talking about black people. This is, again, same kind of language that came from Trump as it related to the Central Park Five that were wrongfully convicted. I mean, it's absurd. And this is the guy that wants to run as the president, who's supposed to be, the alternative to Trump. Some of the rhetoric that he was spewing in support of a crime bill that was in large part geared towards imprisoning black people, and if it wasn't geared toward, that's what the result was. So he says, I don't care why people are in the circumstance there are. I mean, the fact that black people were placed in a circumstance where some of these the lives of crime were the best option. I mean, think about what your military does. When your military advertises itself as the best option for people, impoverished people, I don't know that putting on a uniform to kill for the United States is a better option than maybe some of the street crime stuff. I'm not advocating either one, but on the actual question of reparations, I mean, because there's no question that people are still cast in a situation. When you look at the prison population, that is disproportionately black. And it's not because black people commit more crimes than white people. Even if you break it down to drug crimes, there's no question that white people use drugs at the same rate and sometimes even a higher rate than black people because they got more money. They got more money to spend on it. And yet there are more black people serving time for drugs and drug possession and drug dealing than white people. I mean, it's racism, and it's born out of that. The fact that unemployment is higher for black people, the fact that salaries and incomes are lower, all of that stuff is still a result and holdover from the slave era. Yeah, and you know what? And it isn't just the descendants of slaves that are impacted by that. Anybody who could remotely be associated with being called black is still, pardon the pun, painted with the same brush. I mean, and so they're impacted by it. Now here's the problem. The problem is throwing money at this injustice doesn't fix the injustice. I mean, look, there's been affirmative action. There's been any number of things that the United States has done that in some feeble attempt to fix some of these problems. Now, and they're finally looking at justice reform and stuff like that. I mean, they're going to legalize marijuana in so many states, so rich white men will make money off of that, while there's still people serving prison time for for possession and dealing weed. It's absurd on so many different levels. But I mean, if you were to try to put a price tag on the impact that black people today feel from the travesty that was racism, or if you were trying to, I don't know how you put a price tag on slavery. I mean, I don't know how you put a price tag. I'll tell you, you could put a price tag on if you want to put it on as a percentage of national wealth, because it certainly had a big impact there. And here's a couple of the problems with reparations. Republicans will never approve reparations for black people. I mean, look, they're still largely racist, and it just won't happen. I mean, it just won't happen. And and Trump certainly would never push for. Of course, the Democrats, a bunch of them are running, and they're saying, oh yeah, we're running on a platform of to look at or promote or encourage reparations. But again, it doesn't matter how big a check you write, it's not going to fix the problem. I mean, poverty sounds like it's just a money issue, but it's not. There's a whole legacy of white privilege that goes on with the whole idea of passing down wealth generation after generation after generation. I mean, that's how Trump has his money. He didn't make it on his own. And it's rare that you see multiple generations of black people who've been able to accumulate and improve their lot in life, so to speak. So I'm not against writing checks to people, for the government to do that. I mean, they certainly spend an awful lot of money on military and corporate welfare and everything else. I'm not opposed to it. The problem is it's not going to fix the problem. And the other problem is trying to get it through through a country that is so divided. I mean, look, I look at all of the blatantly racist comments being made because New York State just approved that people who don't have proper citizen documents, and I don't want to call them undocumented because it doesn't, or illegals, but they are people who don't have citizenship documents that they still can, if they can provide enough proper identification, they can still get New York State licenses. I see people going nuts over that. Oh, it's not about racism, it's about the danger. Oh, give me a freaking break. Look, this country is so, I mean, like I said, I posted a meme about a year ago that said something that racism is so American that to even speak about racism is un-American. I mean, that's just a fact. Now, and again, I haven't even crossed over yet to my view on what reparations, if they were ever considered for Native people, would look like. And I'll get to that next. But like I said, if there could be some meaningful legislation that could try to compensate or create an environment that would correct the disproportionate prison population, that would correct the income inequality, and all of that stuff, that'd be great. The problem is they're not even beginning that. They can't even stop gentrification, which is, I mean, the continuation of racist policies that impact people of color. I talk about gentrification in black communities, but I'll tell you, there's no better example of gentrification than look at Hawaii, where the native population had been driven from their homes and from their lands because of wealthy white people and the military bases and tourism. So the tourism industry, rich people like Mark Zuckerberg and Oprah Winfrey, not just white people, I guess, rich Americans, I guess, rich people from the continent, let's just put it that way, however they got there, buying up incredible amounts of land on islands that don't have that much land for all intents and purposes. I mean, there's no greater example of gentrification. And again, huge homeless population in Hawaii. And I know people can laugh about it and say, oh, what greater place to be homeless than in Hawaii? It's, I don't even know how to address that, but so I won't. But no, I mean, when you think about what still exists today, it isn't just that slavery took place, over 100 years ago, 150 years ago. It isn't just that slavery existed. It's the attitude and the remnants of slavery and that racism, Jim Crow, all of it, all the way up through. It's funny. Somebody just mentioned to me the other day about a child turning up missing in Buffalo, and they said, "Oh, was there an Amber Alert?" I haven't heard many Amber Alerts lately. You know why? Because they don't issue Amber Alerts for people of color. It's not that it's against the law to issue Amber Alerts for people of color. They just don't do it. I mean, they should call them Becky Alerts. Honestly, that's what they should call them. They should call them Becky Alerts, because this isn't about finding people named Amber. I know it was based on a little girl that was murdered, so I'm not poking fun at that. But no, the inequity isn't just something that took place 150 years ago and for 100 years prior to that, or several hundred years prior to that. It isn't just that. And it isn't even just here. I mean, look at other countries like Brazil. The population is predominantly people of color, and yet their Congress or their parliament is still all white people. Most of the fighting that's taking place in Venezuela, the opposition to Maduro and Chavez Bolivarian Republic, is all coming from the white people that are there. And the white people are the wealthy people. The white people are the ones who crashed the economy in Venezuela because they didn't like the idea of socialism. Because socialism is about spreading the wealth, and they didn't want it. They didn't want to share their wealth. No way in hell. So that's part of the problem. I mean, you cannot adequately address repairing something if it was designed to be broken? I mean, how do you repair? How do you offer something that is going to be a reparation for a system designed, built on slavery, built on genocide, built on white supremacy, the doctrine of Christian discovery? Being able to equate, locating lands occupied and inhabited by pagans just means you can take it. And you don't even have to. I mean, again, just as John Marshall said, look, however pretentious it may appear to equate discovery with conquest, if we can get away with it, we'll just make it law, and that's what he's done. So, all right, we're gonna take a break with the bottom yard, but I'm gonna spend the next half of the show talking about where do we fit into the equation or into the conversation, and I'll do that when we come back. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. We'll be right back in a few minutes. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. Hey, I want to thank my sponsors. I want to thank Ross and Holly John and the RJE family of businesses, Eric White and ERW Enterprises, a couple of anonymous folks out there who support the program. And I encourage any of you to make contributions. I used to get a check every once in a while from a few people. That's kind of slowed down a little bit. But as you can see, we are doing some improvements. We're trying to make some upgrades to the studio, both our video studio and our audio studio. We continue to. Is the speaker still on? Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah, so we're continuing to do some upgrades, and of course they cost money. We sometimes it's $10, $20, $30 a year. Buying cables and attachments and headphones and microphones, but it adds up. So any of you who make contributions, you help us cover those costs. Look, I also want to thank those of you who share the show, whether you share the Facebook live stream like my wife does, to so many group pages, and I want to thank you administrators of those group pages who allow us to share it. Or if you share our podcasts or our YouTube videos, we are trying to start a conversation. We are trying to have a conversation that isn't happening. There are issues that I'm bringing up on a weekly basis, or not just on the show, but things that I post as a meme. I posted a meme this week, and I said, how many Native people will, when asked the question, if it shows up on the census, and if you even do the, fill out a census, how many of you will claim to be U.S. citizens if that question is on the census documents? And you could tell people were conflicted by it. It's funny. When I posted it on just my Let's Talk Native page, I had a whole lot of people say, "No, not me. I would never do that. I'm not going to even participate in the census." But when I shared it with a perhaps a platform that isn't quite of the same mindset, like on Indian Country Today, a whole lot of people say, "Well, I'm proud to be an American. I would definitely put American." And I'm thinking, there's no benefit to that. There's no benefit to claiming to be an American on a census document, and there's no harm in saying that you're not a citizen. They're going to ask you race and ethnicity questions. I was trying to suggest to people how powerful a statement would it be to the federal government if Native people who do fill out census say, no, my identity is still my original identity. I mean, it's not going to impact funding. It doesn't impact. I mean, when these censuses are about counting the number of people who live in the United States, we could argue whether our territory is the United States, and I think if you live on a native territory, you should say, no, you're not. I'm not in the United States. But I mean, that's what it's for. It's for just counting. But see, these are the kinds of conversations that we try to have, either on the show or I do that through the week on Facebook and Twitter and other places. So, all right, hey, let me get back to what I was talking about. Here's the thing: for me as a Native person, the crimes that have been committed against my ancestors, I couldn't even begin to put a price tag on. And not only can I not put a price tag on it, what would that reparation be for? What would that payment be for? Would it be to say, all right, we're going to pay you for what we did to you, and now we're square, we're good, you're accepting the assimilation that we've imposed upon you? And no, I'm not going to let you pay me to think that you just satisfied a genocide that isn't just in the past, but one that still continues today. Oh, I hear people say, oh, no, genocide still continuing today. No, we're still being forced. We're still having our identity stripped, with everything from not being able to create our own travel documents, being forced to get a U.S. passport, being forced into so many, to be so compliant with laws that shouldn't be impacting us on our territories. That's still genocide. See, genocide is creating the conditions that would cause the people to cease to exist. That's what genocide is. I mean, it includes murdering, ethnic cleansing, stealing children, like with the residential schools. This whole idea of stripping culture away. It includes all that stuff, but it's any of it, even individually. It doesn't mean that you got to have. The test for genocide isn't, you gotta fail in 3 segments of our definition of genocide. No, any one of the I think there's 5 elements that the international community agrees upon on what constitutes genocide. Any of them is genocide. Not, well, if you check the box on the majorities, then you lost the genocide lottery. No, that's not the way it works. So, look, it's almost impossible to try to put a price tag on the injustices, especially since they continue. For me, as a Native person, the only reparation that to me is acceptable is decolonization. It's the idea of stripping away those systems of oppression. I'm not trying to fix them. There's no fixing it. Like I said, how do you repair something that was designed to be unfair, that was designed to be unjust, that was designed to persecute people, to elevate white people and condemn people of color? How do you fix that? I mean, what do you? Oh, well, I got it. We'll enslave white people for the next 100 years, and we'll call it even after that. No, that's. I'm not even suggesting that, but that would be about the only equity that could come out of the whole mix. So, I mean, look, the only way that Native people can ever be justly, or there can be repair, and that's what reparations are for, right? It's supposed to repair the damage. That's to strip away the systems of oppression that are still being imposed upon us. Not just words like citizenship, But taxes, regulations, the interference in our commerce. I mean, the New York State's trying to steal $1 billion from the Seneca Nation over the next 7 years. I mean, cut some of that crap out. That's a reparation. Look, we don't need you to cut us a bunch of checks. And you know what? If you want to cut a bunch of people checks, then cut a bunch of checks to the native people who want to sell their soul to the United States. Maybe that's the deal. Here's my solution for reparations. You come up with some nice fat figure and see how many native people will say, you know what? I'll leave my identity completely behind, and I'm just going to be true red, white, and blue from here on out. But you know what? Get your asses off native territory if that's the case. If you want to be an American, go be an American in America. You want to be a U.S. citizen, go live in the United States. And you know what? Make them pay you for what they've done to you. The fact that they stripped your identity away to so much so that you can't even embrace your own identity, because that's a travesty. And there are a lot of people who are living in that circumstance right now. They can't even fathom the idea. Look, I hear native people talk about being all hop up about going to kill people in Afghanistan. I mean, how many native people are getting all hyped up about going to Iran, to fight in the next battle? I mean, if you're among those people, I got no use for you. I'm sorry. If your idea of a life is killing people because the United States has now named a new enemy, geez, this is like 1984. I mean, I know Orwell's off a little bit, but the idea that the United States just create enemies and then just start waging war, and we're supposed to forget. Oh no, Trump likes Russia now, so Russia's the good guys now. Russia's not the good guys. China's not the good guys. Iran's not the good guys. Iraq's not the good guys. None of these guys are good guys. You know why? Because power corrupts. All of these countries that have built up their oil wealth, built up their militaries, built up their hierarchies, they're all corrupt. And the United States is the worst of the lot, folks. Historically, think about how many people the United States has killed. Think about their advanced weapons technology. The nuclear arms race, the United States did that. The only country in the world to drop 2 of them on a civilian population. Chemical warfare, where do you think some of that stuff was developed? The United States was, look, you only have to go to Standing Rock to see people being hit in the face with pepper spray and tear gas and all kinds of other stuff. I mean, you see, I mean, I think about that Berkeley image of the officer, the campus cop spraying a whole line of students just sitting on the ground, just going and spraying them in the face. I mean, jeez, that's a chemical weapon, folks. Now, is it lethal? Trust me. Have a heart condition and have somebody spray you in the face with that stuff and tell me that it's not a lethal. I mean, and these other non-lethal weapons, like these rubber bullets that they talk about, they're supposed to be shot at no closer range than 10 meters. In Standing Rock, there were people being shot with those things at point blank range almost. Well within that 30. I mean, 10 meters is over 30 feet. And some of these people were being shot so close. One guy lost an eye. I mean, these are supposed to, and whether it's the bean bags or the rubber bullets, they're not supposed to be shot at close range. That's not what they're intended for. So anyway, I get back, and I feel strongly about this. We should not allow a conversation about reparations for slavery continue without us at least engaging the conversation. Not because we're trying to get the fat checks, but because the only true reparation for the stripping of sovereignty and identity, national character, culture from Native people is to allow us to get it back. I don't want to say allow us, but to stop fighting us as we reclaim our identity. Stop trying to claim that you've made us your citizens, that you've subjugated us. Look, there's plenty, like I said, there's plenty of Native people that'll take a check. There's plenty of them. Well, look, I've seen land claims. People thought there was going to be money paid out in land claims. Showed up with shopping bags. Thought they're going to wheelbarrow money away from a land settlement because our people have lost their way. We haven't lost our ways. We lost our way. We forgot what's important. We forgot what 7 generations really means. The only true reparation is decolonization. And to be clear, decolonization doesn't mean running for the president of the United States or Congress. Decolonization isn't about finding comfortable places within the systems of oppression. No, that's not what decolonization is. Decolonization is about untangling those systems of oppression and separating from. It's dismantling those systems as they apply to us. Look, whether we should we dismantle all systems of oppression that the United States is engaged in? Yeah, maybe we should. But this is where I become self-centered. Because if there are an awful lot of Americans who love the systems of oppression that are in place. I mean, the moment Black Lives Matter became a thing, even people who are probably nervous as hell when a cop is behind them started promoting, Blue Lives Matter. They even took and they bastardized an American flag, if you could do such a thing, right? They made it into like a white and black flag, and then they put a blue stripe in the middle or something like that. And, so they altered an American flag to show their support for police. Why? They didn't really care to support police. It was in direct response to Black Lives Matter. That's why these things showed up. Look, there are plenty of people who will sign up for that. Even Native people. Hell, even there are plenty of Black people who've shunned their own. Guys like Bill Cosby spent most of his last few years condemning Black people. Look, do we have fatherhood issues in our territories? Absolutely. And I'll be the first to hold our men and our women accountable for some of the things that they've engaged in. But again, I don't give I could care less what Joe Biden says. If you don't understand the conditions that have created the degrading of our social fabric, if you're going to ignore that, then man, that's white privilege. That's white privilege. You can't ignore when you created the conditions of poverty or conditions of not just poverty but inescapable poverty that exists on Native territory. And then when we do something that finally gives us a glimmer of hope, that we decide, okay, we're going to sell cigarettes because we're going to avoid state taxes. It turns into a 40-year battle, for crying out loud. We start developing gaming, and I'm not a big fan of tobacco or gaming. We start developing gaming as a way to generate some income, and the first thing the state does is, well, how are we getting paid? How are we going to get paid in this? I mean, at every turn, the systems of oppression continue. I mean, frankly, the whole Indian Gaming Regulatory Act is BS. We didn't participate in the drafting of a law. Why would we participate in a drafting of law that would take away our power? But once it got passed, there were some who said, maybe it's easier to go along with the law that they passed to make money than just to have to fight it every day. To have to, do we have a right to do gaming? Yeah, we do. We believe we do. But in the interest of, cost-benefit analysis, it might be more economical to comply. So we make those concessions. We make those compromises. And then they come back and they haunt us. So what's the reparation that I want? No, it's not a check. I don't want a check. And look, I'm not a wealthy guy. I could use the money. But no, it's not a check. We need to strip away the systems of oppression that the state and the federal government, and frankly, the international community. I mean, the fact that we can't travel on our own travel documents, I mean, that's absurd. The fact that the federal government and I say this almost, it seems like I've been saying this almost every week. The fact that the federal government takes 30% of the income, even of Native people living on Native lands, working in their own Native government for a salary, the federal government will take a third of it. We'll just take it. And we don't even know how to fight it. Don't give me a check. Let me keep my own, for crying out loud. No, it's not even about let me keep. Stay away from my own income. Stay away from my ability to support my family. You're not entitled to any of that, any of the equity of my labor. I think it's wrong for, on the rest of for U.S. citizens. I damn sure know it's wrong for us. So no, reparations from a Native standpoint isn't a check. Now, like I said, if a bunch of you guys want to get bought off and go, and live your life as, as U.S. citizens for the rest of your lives, then by all means, that's one of the beautiful things, right? The United States can't deny you that. And why would they? That's what they've always wanted. They either wanted us dead, gone, or just absorbed. That's what the United States wants. I mean, that goes back to Jefferson. Jefferson, in one letter to the Indiana Territory governor, suggested that, look, we should trade with Native people. We should trade with them. And you know what? And give them credit. Let them run up a debt. Because when that debt gets too big, they'll lop off that debt with their land. And when we get enough of them to do that, we'll have them circumscribed, as he called it. We'll have them surrounded. And then they'll either grow so uncomfortable living amongst us that they'll leave. And if they want to maintain their culture, they'll leave. They'll go west of the Mississippi. They'll leave their homelands. Or they'll stay and they'll become us. And they'll abandon their native ways. I mean, that was Thomas Jefferson, the enlightened president. Yeah, right. So this is the experience, right? So when we talk about reparations, I don't know. I mean, how do you put a price tag on 95% of your population being eliminated? Oh, I know. Because yeah, but some of that was just because of disease. Yeah, intentionally spread disease. How do you compensate for lands that were stolen? I mean, if you look on a map today of native territories across the that are within the continental United States, I mean they're pinpricks. I mean, there's a couple that are, might show up on a national map, but otherwise they're a speck. They're a spot. Seneca Nation, these are, I mean, you'd be hard to put if you took a push pin on a national map, you would probably stick a hole bigger than the territories by pushing that pin in the map. And the Seneca Nation's got pretty good land holding compared to some of the other Six Nations. I mean, look, you couldn't write us a check big enough. You couldn't come up with a value that would be just. Now, that's not to say that there aren't plenty of people who would take a check. I mean, think about what a land settlement is, on some of these land claims. Look what just happened in Akwesasne. The idea of getting paid for a land claim is just another unlawful sale. And I say unlawful because, why do I say it's unlawful? Because we don't have the right to sell our children's birthright. All of these land cessions, every one of these freaking treaties that lopped off lands. The language never suggested that we would never have access to those lands again. But that's the way it worked out. Now you get Ruth Bader Ginsburg saying that how absurd it would be for Native people to reclaim lost lands. cites the doctrine of impossibility. Oh, you can't do that. Native people couldn't reacquire lands that were lost, even if they were lost through fraud or theft or whatever else. They can't take it back now. There's too much in place. The land value, those lands were just woods before. Like woods don't have value, right? Those lands were undeveloped. Look, what we have to do to the land that you develop is clean the stuff up because you destroyed it. One of the ways that we would improve land that we get back would be to put trees back on the damn thing, not to remove more of them. Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And then she says that if we could acquire lands back in piecemeal, parcel by parcel, we would create a checkerboard of native lands mixed in amongst non-native lands. She actually said those words. That's exactly what the U.S. policy was. That's what Jefferson talked about. Create a checkerboard. Circumscribe. Let's rip parcel by parcel from them. We'll make it so they can't live as distinct people among us. They'll either have to leave or become the same people, which we won't really let that happen because we're going to keep them on the bottom rungs of society, of economics and society. But Ruth Bader Ginsburg cites how inappropriate it would be for Native people to be able to acquire lands and create a checkerboarded scenario of native lands and non-native lands. And that's exactly what the Dawes Act did. All of the allotment processes were designed to grab parcel by parcel away from Native people. So I have this white lady on the court say, "How that would be inappropriate if Native people could do that." Jeez. No, the systems of oppression have to be dismantled or at very least untangled from our people. And in doing so, doesn't make us an isolated people. Our sovereignty, our control over the lands that we occupy and the activities that all those treaties that said that we would never be disturbed in the free use and enjoyment of our lands, we would have tremendous economies on our territories. If sovereignty were an asset that we could truly put to use, look what we've done with it so far. And I'm not crazy about it being just to gas, gaming, and cigarettes. But in those three industries, we've been able to lift some of our people out of poverty. Just in those three areas. And all three of those areas, we're still fighting the regulatory issues from the outside. As far as the state's concerned, they believe they have a right to tax a sale that's conducted on our territories. If it's to a non-native person, no, let me take it back. As far as the state's concerned, only a Seneca sale to a Seneca is untaxable by the state. That's what the state's view is. Now, they don't enforce it. I mean, I'm Mohawk. I'm Gunjagahaga. I live here. But as far as the state's concerned, I don't have a right to buy something on Seneca territory without paying tax. You don't believe me? Look, that whole idea of creating a quota system associated with tobacco sales, they were basing that on enrolled Senecas. So, I mean, of course, I don't care if you're Seneca, I don't care if you're Mohawk, I don't care if you're white. If you're purchasing a product on this territory, and especially if you live here and consume it here, why would the state have a right? In fact, if you're from Pennsylvania and you come onto Seneca territory and bought something, why would New York State have a right to tax that? But that's the view they have. That is the heavy-handedness that New York State has. And you know what? The federal government supports that stuff. I mean, in fact, in the Contraband Cigarette Trafficking Act, CCTA, they describe what is contraband, any product that doesn't have a state stamp on it, where a state has, requires them. The federal government will not acknowledge that we have the right to have products on our territory, on our shelves, without a state stamp on it. Now, again, nobody's raiding our places. But I'll tell you, when they passed a floor tax a number of years ago, the federal government tried to assess a bunch of taxes on people for product that they had already purchased, brought onto our territory, put them on their shelves, and were for sale. And the federal government says, well, but we raised the tax and you haven't sold it yet. So you got to pay us. You got to pay us the increase in tax on federal tax. That is, I mean, because let's be honest, we're not selling tax-free products here. We're selling products that don't have state tax on it. But almost every cigarette sold on our territories has federal tax on it. Strip that away. Get rid of that. Get rid of the federal income tax. Can you imagine how much our economies would grow, and how much retail and service sector industry and stuff like that we could have if we didn't have looming over our shoulders this notion of having to pay federal income tax or any of the federal excise taxes or any of the state excise taxes? If we didn't have to fight every one of those fronts on everything that we do, if we could truly utilize the distinct nature of our territories, distinct from New York State, think what we could do to save some of the brain drain that happens from universities in the area that have to go overseas. Think about a technology developed at the University of Buffalo that can't go to market here in New York State, can't go to market here in the United States. They've got to take the technology to India or Pakistan. What if they only had to take it to Cattaraugus or Tonawanda or Tuscarora? No, I don't need a check. I need you to stay off of our backs. That's the reparation. Decolonization. Look, and decolonization doesn't mean that we go backwards. We weren't going backwards when white people showed up on our shores. We may have made a big mistake when they showed up on our shores, but we weren't going backwards. We were advancing as a people. Even as we had learned the lessons of, trying to put large population centers together. Yeah, we built cities. We made the same mistake white people did. But we didn't keep building cities. White people wiped out entire areas of Europe by overpopulating areas. And you see the same thing happening in sections of China. People are nuts. They just think there's no consequence to overpopulating the planet. They don't think there's any consequence to overpopulating even a small area. We made the mistake. Then we stopped doing it. They didn't. They just spread like locusts to consume more. Manifest destiny, white man's burden, it was a plague. It wasn't a God-given order. It was a plague. And I'll tell you, again, the United States can write checks all they want. Their economy is not sustainable. Every one of these battles, and this isn't just about Trump. Yeah, he's a moron. But every one of these battles the United States is running up against with other countries on trade issues. Why is it? Well, I'll tell you why. Because the United States is a consumer-driven economy. It is based on gluttonous consumption. Gluttonous consumption of energy products, oil, gas, extractive industries. The whole U.S. economy has been built on creating an insatiable appetite for consumables. So this consumer society can't exist. The United States consumes more of the drugs, more of the electronics, more of the energy, disproportionate to any place else on the planet. I just learned this the other day. 80% of the drugs consumed in the United States come from either India or China. That's where all the generics are made. And frankly, it's not just the generics that are being made in India and China. So all of again, you've got insurance industries, you've got pharmaceutical industries. Dependent on look, I'll tell you, if China wanted to really engage the United States in a trade war, They start tacking on a bunch of tariffs to the generic drugs that they produce. Like I said, it's a systems of oppression that we need to strip away. That's the only reparation. Don't write me a check. You weren't going to write me a check anyway, but don't write me a check. Let's strip away the systems of oppression. Let's understand what decolonization means, because decolonization, again, is not about us being made more comfortable within the U.S. system, or being lulled into believing that we're equals. Why would you want to be equal to the people who killed your ancestors? Why would you want to be that? I'll never understand that. Why would you embrace the religion that cast you as less than human? Why would you serve in a military that killed your people and now just kill other people who don't look a whole lot different than you? Brown faces, black hair, brown eyes. United States took its Indian fighters, the ones who were killing our people, and the very next thing they did is they started killing Filipinos. Went to the Philippines and killed those people. And again, not in any small number either. By some estimates, it may have been as many as 1 million people, 1 million Filipinos. Somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million Filipinos were killed when the United States believed that they had somehow purchased the Philippines or whatever, however they claimed to have gotten it away from Spanish control. When Spain was driven from the Filipinos thought they were free. No, you weren't. You just got a new master, one that speaks English badly. All right, well, that pretty much wraps it up, folks. Look, don't let a conversation about reparations happen without us having a conversation in there too. That's my first message. And let's think twice before we start trying to put a number on what they need to pay us, because no number is worth it. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. Thanks for listening.